Senior Transportation Planner with Transportation Planning and Programming. As mentioned, we're here to present the draft proposal for the Bryant Avenue reconstruction project. Trey is going to start it off, and I'm kind of going to join back in. We're going to leave as much time for questions as possible. This is a very long corridor. So there's lots of available information online. We're just going to kind of hit some of the high points and then talk about the things you all are most interested in. And I'll hand it off to Trey.
Sorry, Liz, I was on mute.
No worries. I was like, he was here 2 seconds ago.
Yeah. Sorry about that. There's a little bit of background noise. My brain sometimes shuts down when I hear background noise. Yep, so I'll go ahead and start. As Liz mentioned, Trey Joyner, I'm Associate Transportation Planner with the City of Minneapolis. And an Assistant Project Manager for the Bryant Avenue South Reconstruction Project. As Liz did note that we do have a lot of information online that I'll kind of briefly go over as I'm going through our draft recommended concept here. But so if there's anything in detail that you kind of want to ask more about, don't hesitate to ask me, myself, or Liz, but also I'll just note that, yeah, there's a lot more information online. So the Bryant project, reconstruction project, is a 2.5-mile long reconstruction project that goes over 5 business nodes and overlaps with the bicycle boulevard, bikeway along Bryant that connects down to Minnehaha Parkway and then connects to the north up to Midtown Greenway and all the way up to Franklin and up closer to downtown. Bryant has transit on it, as well as 2 lanes of parking and 2 travel lanes. It's 60 feet of right-of-way and 55 feet of effective right-of-way. So with kind of that knowledge, Public Works has 5 project goals for the project. Those are to, and I'll just note that these project goals are set in place by city policy, our Transportation Action Plan, which you are familiar with, and our Vision Zero Action Plan, our Complete Streets Policy, and also Minneapolis's Declaration of Climate Emergency. We're kind of incorporating all those into how we set the project goals for this project, in addition to some of the stakeholder feedback we received thus far. So those goals are to improve pedestrian safety and comfort, create an all ages, all abilities bicycle connection in the area, which is language that is enumerated in our Transportation Action Plan, which means to create a bicycle facility that's comfortable and usable by a wider range of cyclists, not just those who are most comfortable with riding in lane with vehicles. Also to support existing and future transit service in the area. Liz will talk more about this as she goes over the proposal to move transit to Lindell. Also, we're proposing adding a luscious amount of boulevard along the corridor, and this is speaking to the goal about supporting and using green infrastructure to treat stormwater runoff. And also we know that, as I mentioned, there are 5 business nodes along Bryant and a few businesses scattered throughout the corridor, and we want to support and accommodate business deliveries and customer access because we know that's important to people who live and frequent the corridor. So the project timeline, in 2020, we started off the conceptual design. We kicked it off with our first open house in spring of last year, where we went over our existing conditions. We put out a survey online. We also had a wiki map where folks could interact with the map and put in their specific comments around certain blocks. And then throughout that, from spring to December, we continued our first phase of outreach and contacting businesses and talking with stakeholders and collecting and synthesizing all that first round engagement that, as I mentioned, is on our website for your review. And then in December, we had we kicked off phase 2 with our draft recommended concept, where we had our virtual open house. And we launched another round of online wiki map that actually showed our draft concept, which is up on our website, and another survey. From December 10th on to where we are now, we're continuing that second phase of engagement. We had some very successful small group meetings last week, 6, where we talked with residents along with Lindell and Bryant. And so we've kind of done a lot over the course of 2020 and to where we are now. The intent is to move toward a council-approved document early summer, or council-approved design concept in early summer, and then moving on to detailed engineering design after that. And this project will be constructed over 2 years, starting in 2022, and then moving on to 2023. We haven't determined which section of the road to be constructed first, but we know we would split it at some point. So with that, that was a lot of talking. I'm gonna kind of go over a little bit of our design considerations that we considered, or designs that were considered, excuse me, as I get this PDF working. There we go. Oh, internet's slow. Sorry. All right, so as that moves, so some of the design options we considered were the squeeze it in option, bikes on Bryant, which is reflected in the draft current proposal, and the transit on Bryant. Because of our project goals and ensuring that we meet those as we move forward on the design, we decided that the bikes on Bryant option and moving transit to Lindell was most viable for meeting the project goals and accounting for stakeholder feedback. Squeeze it in option essentially recreated what Bryant is today. And so we don't get a lot of deliveries on green infrastructure. We don't get a lot of deliveries on safe and comfortable bikeways or deliveries on supportive transit or pedestrian accessibility along the corridor. And then the transit on Bryant option, we kind of moved away from that because that involved moving a bicycle facility to an adjacent street, but also Bryant suitability for transit in the future. It's limited due to the limited right of way on Bryant. And actually the option to move bicycles to adjacent street, and I'll use Aldrich as an example, actually gave us all the issues of putting a bicycle, most of the issues of putting a bicycle facility on Bryant without a lot of the benefit to moving it to an adjacent street, because we would still have to end up partaking in kind of removing a whole lane of parking and dealing with some of our most complicated intersections at like Lake and 50th. So as I mentioned, Bryant is 60 feet of right of way. It's 55 feet of effective right of way, and Public Works kind of as a practice tends to work within that effective right of way. That effective right of way essentially is when we're constrained by retaining walls or fences or stairways. We tend to want to avoid dipping into those because they can become costly and can kind of put a lot of not stress, but it can lengthen the work that we need to do lengthen the time span of work we need to engagement we need to do on the project to kind of coordinate those things away. So going on to the draft concept trade-offs, these are essentially kind of what I talked about when we considered those three options. So in addition to meeting the project goals and kind of why we selected the moving transit to Lindell option, we incorporated some stakeholder priorities. Those were maintaining vehicle access and maintaining on-street parking into our project goals. And when we looked at those side by side, the trade-offs between each design consideration, and when we incorporated those stakeholder priorities, we found that the option to keep bikes on Bryant and then move transit to Lindell met most of our goals without compromising, without having too many severe trade-offs. So in addition to the reasons we went forward, where we went forward with the current draft recommended design proposal, as I kind of detailed earlier, we're still in the kind of phase of stakeholder outreach, but what we've heard thus far is reflected in our draft design proposal, but I'll kind of like talk about what that actually was. So we've heard from a lot of people that we want to improve the bicycle facility, create a protected, dedicated bicycle infrastructure. There's concerns around combining bikes, cars, and buses on the same narrow street. We know Bryant's a very constrained corridor. We've also heard about feedback about slowing vehicle speeds and traffic calming. I would say that this has been one of the most paramount things we've heard across all stakeholders, is that it's really important that we slow and calm speeds along Bryant. And as if you've had the chance to look over the draft concept, you can see this by some of the chicanes we've offered in the road and the narrowing of the road cross section and right sizing our parking at certain blocks. We've also heard calls for increased green infrastructure. We've added boulevards to Bryant, which previously no boulevard existed. And in some places we have large enough boulevards to plant large trees and do some water quality infrastructure. Also, we've heard comments about the need to cross the street or at cross street intersection control, but also the calls for intersection safety improvements along Lindell as we kind of think about what that proposal to move trains to Lindell looks like, and then just general concerns about pedestrian accessibility in the area. So generally, our stakeholder priorities are aligned with Public Works' project goals, but as I mentioned, we have heard a few, well, not a few, but a decent amount of feedback that relates to kind of running contradictory to our project goals, and those are like the vehicle access and on-street parking. This project also will have assessments. And so I think if any of you have had the chance to look at the draft concept on the website now, and before I pass it off to Liz, I just kind of wanted to talk about some of these, briefly talk about some of these like design treatments we're considering that you can kind of see on the draft concept. And these are, none of these are too shouldn't be too unfamiliar to you all. We have bump outs at intersections where we want to shorten the crossing distance and tighten the vehicle turning radii. We have a bicycle trail on the corridor. In the southern portion of the corridor, it's shared use. In the northern portion of the corridor, it's separated from the sidewalk. As I mentioned, we have chicanes to slow vehicle speeds and add to traffic calming. And then also right sizing our parking on certain blocks where we know we have too much parking to supply the anticipated use. And then green infrastructure as well. So just kind of talking about that, Liz, I think I'll pass it off to you. Let me know what page I need to be on.
Yeah, thanks. Head to page 7 for me. I think I'm going to speak to 43rd specifically, just from a pedestrian perspective. So,
and I want to let Liz, I want to let everyone know you can zoom in on Teams. If you press Control and scroll on your mouse, you can zoom in on your screens as well.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good reminder. So, as kind of we mentioned at the outset, this is a very long corridor. There's a lot of detail. Wanted to highlight some of the things that Trey mentioned in that matrix from a pedestrian perspective, how we're delivering on that goal for safe access for pedestrians and pedestrian comfort. One kind of overall guiding piece or overarching piece is the two different cross sections that we're proposing on the street based on our existing counts and projected land use for these areas. So the big difference is in the southern section in this draft proposal, we have a shared use path, 10-foot shared use path. And in the northern section, we are proposing splitting out the pedestrian and sidewalks. We'll scroll away from that in a second here to show an example of what that looks like. But in the northern half, where we know we have higher densities, higher existing bicycle and pedestrian counts, we are currently proposing to make a separated bike and pedestrian facility. I'll also note if at our business nodes, we're also separating out. So even in the section where we have our shared use path, Trey, if you could scroll over to like 43rd for me, right on that intersection with Clara Barton, easier to explain to folks.
Up here, right? That's 44. Oh, there we go.
There we go. So right by that number 7, kind of explains what I was talking about here. So you can see we've got the shared use path on the west side of the trail, but in the locations of the business nodes, in this section where we have the shared use path, we know that pedestrian counts are higher and we have the full 60 feet of right of way to work within at these nodes. And so we're proposing to separate out there to give a little bit more space for pedestrians and cyclists at these locations. Similarly, from a bicycle perspective, sorry, I keep asking you to scroll back and forth. In terms of comfort, you can see those really wide boulevards. And that was one of another driving pieces of why we were proposing a shared use path in the southern section in terms of trade-offs between trying to fit everything in within this narrow right of way. So we get really wide boulevards here, but we hit that minimum threshold of 5 feet in almost the entire portion we have the shared use path. And that 5 feet is really important because that's the minimum amount we need to plant large trees. So that was a really important thing for us that we tried to hit throughout here. Also trying to balance in parking where needed, as Trey mentioned, but in multiple locations, really right sizing and making some pretty drastic, I'll say, changes to what this cross section with the street looks like today, all getting towards trying to narrow this street up and slowing traffic speeds. Also including a chicane on each of the blocks, going closer to getting closer to making sure that we keep those speeds at a minimum. So you can see that there at number 8. So just as a reminder for folks, the chicane is where we kind of put a wiggle in the center line, I'll call it, and helps keep traffic speeds to a minimum. Trey, you want to go back to the 43rd intersection for me? So also wanted to highlight just the very narrow cross section, both on Bryant itself, but on the cross streets. So on Bryant today, it's 40 feet curb to curb, as Trey mentioned. At each of these crossings, we're narrowing that up to 22 feet. And then on the cross street, so if you were going to cross 43rd here, down by number 7, today that's a 30-foot crossing, and we're proposing narrowing that up to 22 feet. And those dimensions aren't, exact at each of the cross streets for all of these, but the 22-foot, not every foot is 30, not every cross street is 30 feet today, but at every cross street, we're narrowing it up to that 22-foot, really narrow distance. So we were pretty happy that we could get to that. Other pedestrian pieces, I'll say that the shared use path, if we're going to talk about feedback that we've heard, not only, we've heard a lot of concerns about parking from folks. We have heard concerns about pedestrian and bicycle use within this section. It's something we were thinking about what we can do to help with that concern, but just want to be transparent. That is something we're hearing. If you could head to page 9 for me, Trey, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So this is where I was talking about up in the northern half. So we are the current proposal transitions at 40th Street. Taking feedback on that transition point from folks. If you head to our survey, you'll see if you've taken it. That's something that we're specifically asking about where that transition point people think that should be. So here you can see a block though. So this part of the design north of 40th is where we separate out the bike trail from the sidewalk. On some blocks, you can still get some pretty healthy boulevards here. You'll see this block because we can go out to our full 60 feet of right of way based on the work that we've already done. However, when you get to the blocks like 30, we'll say 31st up to Lake Trey for me. When you get to the blocks where we have to work within our 55 feet of right of way, then things can get fairly stark, unfortunately, when we are in these blocks where we know we have the most amount of pressure in the right of way. So this is where, people are familiar with the area. We've got the highest amount of bike counts, highest amount of ped counts, highest amount of traffic, highest amount of parking. And unfortunately, these are some of our locations where we have our some of the biggest need for green infrastructure, or at least it's an opportunity area for us based on some of the earlier that we've done. But when you're talking about trying to get everything in within that 55 feet, we ended up with this as our kind of first go for how we're balancing all those items within the right of way. You'll see that there's no boulevard on the east side. The 8.5 foot of sidewalk is needed when we're building, sidewalk directly against a travel lane there. So that extra 1.5 feet we need for clear zones, for signage, anything else that it's going to be right along that sidewalk for snow storage as well. So our first draft of how we would balance these things, highlighting this block because we are taking feedback on the option of exploring a one-way. There would be, trade-offs with that as well, mostly with vehicular impacts to cars traveling on adjacent streets and on Lindell. But we're exploring it. We won't, because we know that with a one-way option, would free up some more space to invest in more boulevard, as well as in some of these from more parking, frankly, in places where we're hearing from folks that are really concerned about what parking will do, and about what the drastic reduction in parking will do to the livability of these blocks.
Is that a one-lane, one-way that's being considered?
Correct. Sorry, I should have. Yeah, we don't have the specific cross sections or graphics for that at this point, because we still have a lot of work to do before we would bring out what exactly that looked like in terms of impacts. But yes, it would be a one-lane, one-way. And someone at the BAC mentioned this week a very important point about this is that for folks that we've heard from, want to bike pretty fast on the street, and may not want to be using a separated bicycle trail to go very quickly, it would have impacts on people's ability to bike quickly on the street. Is it just something to highlight? Always a trade-off as you start to move some of these things around.
Is it feasible to do narrower on-street bike lane? Is it feasible to do a narrower on-street bike lane for those specific users?
No, not on street. We'd have to get something on street that was striped. We would have to take space away from all the items behind the curb. Before we head into questions, I do want to highlight, one of the ways that we've freed up a lot of space here is our proposal to move transit from Bryant to Lindell. You can check out what that proposal looks like on the website. And right now we've got draft locations for where stops would be. We're working with Metro Transit and Hennepin County, obviously, as Hennepin County owns that street, to figure out what that looks like in more detail. We'd be coming out with that in our next round of outreach. But one of the biggest things we've heard from folks is concerns about pedestrian safety on Lindell. I'll note that this section of Lindell looks very different, south of Lake than it does north of Lake, but we're still hearing concerns about pedestrian crossings, specifically at those intersections where we're proposing transit stops at unsignalized, so intersections with no traffic signal at those intersections. I'll say one of the really great opportunities that we have through this project that we wouldn't have if we wouldn't be proposing or end up moving transit to Lindell is that we'd be able to make investments at those intersections, specifically looking at pedestrian medians along that corridor at those locations. I think we hit the high points. Trey, did I miss anything big?
No, I think we got it. I think we're ready for a couple questions.
Great.
I have a quick question. When you mentioned that slowing traffic is a priority, are you building for 20 miles per hour or 25 miles per hour?
Good question. We are the speed limit on this street would be 20 miles per hour if it were moved. Yes.
Okay, so my question, I guess, is would it be possible to go down to at least one 9-foot lane if you have got a low speed? I know that there are probably delivery vehicles on the street, but would it be possible to have narrower lanes like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, based on the guidelines that we're building to on this street and kind of based on the amount of traffic that we know is currently being served here, 9-foot lanes aren't going to be something that Public Works proposes on the street.
Okay. I appreciate the 20-mile-an-hour design. I think that's really great because it will mean that bicyclists will be more comfortable biking mixed in traffic, which should free up a little bit of those fast bicyclists. My second question was something that Julia Curran has brought up a number of times, which if you're doing green infrastructure and stormwater collection, one of the concerns that we always have is that stormwater collection and pedestrian crossings are co-located. And is that something that you were looking at? Like, you know, they're all at the corners, right? So you have backed up stormwater into pedestrian crossing areas. And are you guys looking at putting stormwater collection mid-block?
Yeah. So right now at this level of design, we won't be getting to answer those questions, but we can note it. But I'll say, yes, we are planning on, looking at treatments mid-block as well. Right now, we're only carving out the available space to make those investments in green infrastructure and those best management practices. So whether that be, something above ground, which is often much cheaper. So rain garden, tree trenches, etc. We can pass that note along to our designers, but at the moment that we wouldn't be able to answer that detailed question.
Could we
Okay,
talk tabled intersections then, particularly around? Could we talk about tabled intersections?
So for the tabled intersections, we are, hold on, sorry. I want to write down that thing because I want to put that on my post 30%. Hold on one second. And I didn't have my notes up because I've got too many Teams windows on this small laptop. Hold on one second. So post 30, it's drainage for GI at intersections. Okay, now I can type and talk at the same time. So tabled intersections. I will say that we have really learned from some of our past projects. So the Girard Avenue and Johnson Street projects, where at this level of design, we said, yeah, we can do tabled crosswalks and or raised crosswalks at, I guess you asked about tabled intersections. I'm going to talk about raised crosswalks quickly, and then I'll get to tabled intersections as well because they're related. And we know that the raised crosswalks, especially on the side where the bicycle trail or the shared use path are really important. But I'll say at this level of design, it's really difficult to, to 100% say with 100% certainty that we can get those in. So we don't want to overpromise to everyone and then not be able to get them in. Based on some of the grades on some of our past projects, it's ended up that, to get them in, to make them work, once we got out in the field, we realized that we would have to, reconstruct like a full block of a street for the intersection. And we just unfortunately don't have this project scope and available budget to do that in some locations. However, as I said, we know they're really, really important. And so we have that noted, and it's something Public Works will be continuing to track as the project moves forward. In terms of tabled intersections, this project is a municipal state aid street, and unfortunately it makes it very, difficult to be able to do that design treatment along Bryant Avenue, along the north-south sides of Bryant Avenue for tabled intersections.
What is the barrier there? Is it the same as on the Memorial?
Excuse me?
But I know that Olson Memorial, the issue was if vehicles going at the posted speed limit would like go airborne or something. What are the MSA concerns with tabled intersections?
Sure. So it's based on the design guidelines. So you'd be able to get something that would be like designed for, just a very slow speed. It would look more like a Nicollet Avenue, Nicollet like downtown design, like the Nicollet Mall, where in my opinion, they're good for the Nicollet Mall for what that design was. But if we're talking about speed reductions,
I'm thinking primarily around
going to get them as much.
I think primarily around drainage, particularly looking at bike paths and sidewalks. Those having non-street bike paths that end up with the same kinds of issues with plowing that sidewalks and crosswalks have constantly. So at the very least, the slightly raised intersections of Nicollet seem to, if there's going to be melt days, shed water, unlike most intersections in Minneapolis.
Sure. I mean, all the drainage will be looked at in detail, but I can pass that along that you guys think that those are, or that you, maybe Julia, I don't want to say everyone that we're working on, seeing some nods are working well, so that's great. In terms of drainage, cool. Yeah, I can pass that along.
We're going to have to wrap it up pretty quick with this. Are there other questions for this project?
Sure, I have a couple questions. So Liz, what's the average daily traffic on Bryant right now?
Trey, can you help me out with that one? It's 3,000 vehicles per day up in the north, and I want to say it ranges down to 1,000 in the south. Is that correct?
Yep.
Have it on our okay, yeah.
Okay. And then on your typical section between 40th and Lake, you have a bikeway, 8-foot bikeway, 5-foot walk, and then a 1-foot boulevard. To me, that's hardly worth using that space, because I'm sure that grass or whatever turf you put in there is not going to last. And I'm wondering if you made that all hard surface, I assume the city's going to plow the bikeway. If you made that whole section hard surface with some kind of divider, then could the city then plow the walk at the same time? So you get snow removal in there? Because I can see where the residents would plow their, shovel the walk, throw it onto the bikeway, and then the city comes back and pushes it back towards the walk. So that's, I'm wondering how you're planning to handle that.
Yeah, can you, I don't see a 1 foot.
Yeah,
we don't have a 1 foot boulevard in anywhere. We specifically took that out for the reason that you just mentioned. So we wouldn't be recommending planting anything in a 1 foot dimension.
On your typical section, on the again from 40th to Lake, between the bikeway, the 8-foot bikeway, and the 5-foot walk, you show a 1 foot strip of grass.
Got it. That maybe just be a poor communication and color choice on our part. That would just be to note like the clear zone, and that we would be having some sort of oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking. Detectable warning of some sort, so people would know that people with vision impairments would be able to delineate between those two types of uses, or excuse me, two types of design features on the street. Your question about plowing is interesting. I'll have to ask our plowing folks about the operations of how that would work. But you are correct. So the city would be plowing the any location, so that both the shared use path and the 8-foot bike trail, we'd be responsible for plowing that.
On the Hennepin-Lindale bottleneck, generally the property owners do not seem to consider the sidewalk something that needs to be cleared. So it becomes a functional mixed use where it's separated, just as, which is sort of a different issue than what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll note, I think our maintenance staff would say that they will take care of the path and not, and the sidewalk will still be the properties, and I don't think they'll push all the snow onto the sidewalk. I imagine it'll go left, hopefully, but.
Yes, I agree with that.
I'm concerned talking about the parking and livability and transition plans for parking, just thinking about climate breakdown, looking at how much parking is being provided adjacent to transit corridors, and building a street that should outlast the current parking demands. What is the transition plan for those spaces, and what kind of consideration is being given to the livability of the negative livability of providing that parking, as well as continuing to incentivize driving so close to transit lines?
Good question. So I would say that, we are throughout the entire corridor at a high level currently proposing to remove 70% of the parking. It's a pretty drastic change. And as we're kind of moving towards how people are currently using the street and making that transition, we're hearing from folks about how they typically get around, and what the level of transit service that is available today, and how they might get there, and how they currently structure their lives. That being said, we're balancing that very carefully against the our goal for green infrastructure here. If you take a look at, and specifically why we're talking about the one way, so that's like the biggest consideration here is how we can try and thread that needle between those two items that you just brought up and the tension there.
When you say green infrastructure, are you including sidewalks and bike lanes, or is that just about stormwater management via swales and stuff?
I didn't hear the first part, so then I didn't clearly understand your question. You said when I'm
What-
talking about green infrastructure.
Like, is green infrastructure stuff that supports sustainability, like walking and biking and transit, or is it only sort of the boulevard space or drainage?
Yeah, so to that goal, so when we're talking about green infrastructure on this project, we're talking specifically about drainage and planting large trees and other native plantings and what we can get within those boulevards. So we're specifically talking about that, and then we're looking at our opportunity areas. So we've done a lot of groundwork. You can check that out on the website as well, to try and identify the areas where it's most our biggest opportunities to be investing, and trying to make sure that we have boulevard space available for those design treatments.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to stop soon because we've got 3 other proposals. So we appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Trey. Will you be coming back? I have one question. Will you be coming back when you're at 30% or no?
Yeah, we're actually probably gonna be coming back twice. So we're coming
Okay.
out in March, and then as well March, April-ish with another kind of draft proposal, likely on Bryant, but it's going to be really focused on Lindell and what those design features look like. And then, so, as Trey mentioned, sometime in the summer, we would be coming through with our final recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And now we have, you bet. And now we have Forrest Hardy coming up with Lowry Avenue Northeast Reconstruction.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Forrest, Transportation Planner with the City of Minneapolis. Here to talk about Lowry Avenue from Washington to Johnson Street in Northeast. It's a 2023 construction project. And we have Kelly Augusto with the county that's here to talk about that today.
Okay.
Hi there. I'm not sure if it's on. I think I got an error message on that, but as Forrest mentioned, I'm Kelly Augusto. I work for Hennepin County in their Transportation Design Division, and am the project manager for the Lowry Avenue Northeast Reconstruction project. So just going to go over some higher level details on that for you this evening on phase or segment 1 of 2 that received federal funding, and also kind of recap some concept recommendations that came out of the study done in 2015. So I'm sorry, I should have shared my screen for you there too. Can you all see the slides? Yes, okay. Thank you, Forrest. So the segment that I'll be talking about is about 1 mile along Lowry Avenue from Washington Street to Johnson Street, and includes the intersection with Central Avenue, or Minnesota Highway 65. From a high level standpoint, new infrastructure to be included with the reconstruction would be pavement replacement, curb and gutter, storm sewer, and traffic signals. I believe there are 4 traffic signals within the project limits. And improvements for corridor users would include updated ADA accommodations, sidewalks, facilities for biking, and also streetscape enhancements. Some of the project background includes a study that was done or that culminated in 2015 with the Lowry Avenue Northeast Corridor Plan and Implementation Framework. All of that information is still available on the county's website at the link provided in the slide. It was adopted by the Minneapolis City Council and then the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners in 2015. And it included a pretty extensive public engagement, and also traffic analysis was done to provide some concept recommendations, essentially, which is kind of where we're looking at a starting point. Basically, we haven't gotten into, we certainly aren't at a preferred alternative at this point, but just thinking through some options, and of course, taking into account what came out of the 2015 study. So they pretty much kind of split this segment of the corridor in two at Central Avenue. So east of Central Avenue, they were looking at wider sidewalks, parking and bicycle facilities, and a two-lane roadway. So maybe easier graphic to look at that came out of those study documents is shown in this slide, where there's an existing view of Lowry Avenue in the upper left corner, and then a proposed view of what it could look like with this concept is shown on this slide as well. And then moving to the segment of Lowry west of Central Avenue, the study looked at wider sidewalks and a three-lane roadway, and then a graphic to look at that depicts that a little more clearly is on this slide and shows the existing segment of Lowry Avenue in the upper left again, and then what the proposed segment of Lowry Avenue could look like. And then some traffic volume information that I pulled just from the Hennepin County multimodal counts map that's available online as well. From 2017, these were the average annual daily traffic numbers west of Central and east of Central. And just some highlights on the project schedule. The project received federal funding through the regional solicitation process in 2018. Preliminary design is starting and will go through, I would say, more like fall of 2021 here, and then detailed design would start at that point and go through approximately the end of 2022, with construction planned to take place starting in 2023 and likely going into 2024. For community engagement, I've had the opportunity to talk to the Wyndham Park Citizens in Action Association a couple of times. Again, just presenting basically the same information, the high-level concepts that came out of the 2015 study, and was able to work with Oliver Smith in CPED about acquisitions that are in progress at Central and Lowry. So just kind of coordinating all of that, and also coordinating with the city's Johnson Street project as well. So future engagement plans are starting soon. I'm working to hire a consulting firm to assist us with public engagement and also traffic analysis. So that'll be kicking off soon. And with that, that's about all the information I have for you tonight, but I can entertain some questions, and just knowing that we haven't dug into a lot of the details yet, but I'd certainly like to hear your initial thoughts. Barb, I think you're on mute.
I have a question. You gave the traffic counts. Do you have the ped counts, the pedestrian counts, and the bicycle counts as well? Is it a highly traveled area with pedestrians and bicyclists?
Sure. I don't have those numbers readily available in the information I have tonight, but I'm pretty sure there's information on that from what was looked at in 2015, and I certainly am planning to get that information from our transportation planning group who works on that, and also coordinate with Forrest and any information the city might have that way.
I looked at that, but I couldn't find it when there's a lot of information from that study, so I didn't find it. But that'd be great if the next time you come back, we could get that information. That'd be great.
Ped and bike counts, sure.
Yeah.
Is there information available via the Streetlight app through Hennepin County's license?
We do have the ability to work with the Streetlight data, yes. So that's something I can look at with our transportation planning group as well.
This is Matthew. I pulled up the city's ped bike count website, and we do have some counts. You know, it's been counted a variety of times, and kind of since 2012, kind of ranges between about 500 and 600 peds per day near Lowry and Central. And I think that is like one of the main areas that we count. Yeah, that's like the basic area that we've counted in our count program. So that's
Thank
peds.
you, Matthew. That is out there. I forgot about that. Thank you.
Yep.
Great.
And real quick, bikes are very low, which like 90 to 100 per day, which makes sense since it's not a bikeway.
Okay. Thanks.
It also feels pretty unsafe. So it seems like that both of those would be on the low side compared to if that area felt friendly at all or comfortable.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks.
My biggest question is about why choose to have a 3-lane roadway west of Central Avenue when the ADT is not all that different in the west segment than it is in the east segment.
That's a great observation, Aaron. I wasn't involved in any of the study done in 2015, but I do know that they did base their recommendations on traffic analysis and public engagement. So I know that traffic modeling was done to come to that conclusion that that would work well based on forecasts in the area.
Are those forecasts being redone given that it's a completely different context than those tend to look at? They tend to look just at sort of perpetual growth of driving as opposed to climate breakdown and pandemics and a world in crisis.
Sure. Yeah, we're working to hire a traffic consulting firm right now so that they can do some preliminary modeling and take those things into consideration and update all of that work, basically. Yep.
Will the lane widths be adjusted to reflect what's better for people outside of cars compared to what's shown on the presentation?
Lane widths would definitely be something that we'll be looking at in more detail. Certainly, it's not a detail that we've really come to a conclusion on or anything at this point.
Okay, so they're just sort of thrown in there. They're not.
Those from the study, yes, they were just for concept level purposes. Yep.
So you anticipate being back here sometime in the summer or late spring of 2021, or maybe later than that?
You said the next phase, or maybe at about the 30% level design. I'll coordinate with Forrest on that, but yeah, I think summer timeframe would probably be good to come back.
Okay. Any other questions for Kelly or Forrest? No? Okay, well, we appreciate you bringing this to us. We'll look forward to seeing more design elements and some of the answers to the questions we had when you come back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time tonight.
Sure. Then we're going to go to Upper Harbor with Alexander Cato and Nathan Koster from the city of Minneapolis.
Hey, we also have Ciara from Tool Design Group that'll be
Okay.
attending, and we'll be talking to some of the points.
Okay, great.
Let me just turn on my video. And I'm gonna pull up the presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
I can, yeah. I
Okay.
don't know if anybody can, yeah.
Yeah, just let me know if my audio is sounding off or anything like that. I'm just gonna adjust this as well so I can see folks' face on my other screen. Okay, everyone can still see my presentation screen, correct?
I can, yeah. Other
Okay.
people,
And how much time do I have? I just want to make sure I'm being respectful to the other.
we have about a little less than 40 minutes left, so maybe 18 minutes. So we have
Okay.
we've got a final presentation.
So I should try to get done around 5:40 or so, 5:45?
Yeah. That'd
Okay.
And Barb, sometimes we go past 6
We
with this.
go
I know
a
we
little
not try
yeah.
not to, but if we need to, I feel like this is a pretty big project. So if there are questions, I'm happy to run over if people are able to stay for my last one by a few minutes.
I am happy to go over too. So
Awesome. So I'll hop into it. My name is Alexander Cato. I'm a transportation planner within Transportation Planning and Programming, here to present today on Upper Harbor Terminal. We've been to various PAC and BAC committees over the last few years with a lot of the high-level concepts, and are here today to talk through the public realm and infrastructure. This is a 10% concept. There's been, for those that have been following the Upper Harbor Terminal, there's a lot going on with the project, especially around the land use components. CPED's been leading the coordinated plan, which really touches on a lot of the land use developments, but also does contain infrastructure. And so we're here today to talk to you about the public realm and infrastructure, and really those multimodal components and how they impact the bike, ped, and transit experience. So just a little bit of orienting. The site is here. It's surrounded by this blue line. It's just under 50 acres, so it's an industrial area, still an active industrial area. Adjacent land uses are still relatively industrial and is going to be transitioned into a mixed-use development. So it's a really big transition, and obviously with that transition, there's definitely a desire to ensure that the internal transportation system and then the accompanying transportation system to the site is multimodal, provides, and I'll talk about this in our next slide, provides a safe and convenient bike and ped experience, and really maximizes that riverfront, especially this part of Minneapolis does not have a ton of river recreational spaces. And so I think we can all agree that this is a really exciting experience and place and time for this development. So from an infrastructure standpoint, you can see here we have the blue line, which is Doweling Avenue North. This will be reconstructed. The original scope stopped at the bridge, and a few of us, me and Nathan and others, realized that the western segment up to Lindell was in need of some vast improvements in order to really highlight that primary access point. So that's Doweling. You can't see it in here, but we're also looking at the CIP in 2025 and expanding this treatment further west, I believe, to Thomas Avenue. And so we're trying to get this to continue all the way to Theoworth Parkway and provide a really nice east-west connection. The green represents Parkway Phase 1. Parkway Phase 2 is dashed here. This will not occur with the Phase 1 developments. And then 33rd Avenue North is also going to be in Phase 1. So the solid yellow, solid green, solid blue lines will start construction in 23 and be wrapped up in a couple years. And then the Phase 2 development will likely come in 2025 and beyond. This is about a mile of infrastructure, so it's quite a bit. I mean, if you could imagine walking through all of that, it'd probably take you, for the fast walkers, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes, but I think with all the activation and activities, you could easily spend a couple of hours just enjoying this space and this place. Another piece of this, so obviously we have, what you see above the ground, the walking, the rolling, but also the utilities under the ground. We're providing water, sanitary, overhead power, and also stormwater. For this presentation, we're not going to delve too deep into the stormwater. When we come back to you in March with our 30% concepts, we'll have more robust stormwater examples to share. But just wanted to highlight that, as you can imagine, with a development adjacent to the river, there's a tremendous opportunity to really provide some robust stormwater features. One of the biggest decision points we're at right now is, do we have the capacity to integrate a regional system or just a district system? So a district stormwater system would be everything on the site, capturing, conveying, and treating that stormwater runoff. And then a regional system would include some of the areas to the west, north, and south of this area, and having a more robust, comprehensive stormwater treatment. And that really is reflective of an ongoing conversation with the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization as to the feasibility of implementing and maintaining such a system. But just key takeaway for this is no stormwater. The key takeaway for this slide is know that stormwater is definitely in scope for this project. We don't have a ton to share for you right now. When we come back in March, we'll have more robust examples, but just want to highlight that because it definitely is a public utility piece. So for phase one is Upper Doweling. If you've been on Doweling, if you've been on the site, you know that there's a significant slope. And so we've called Upper Doweling pretty much from the bridge, the Doweling Bridge in west. And it's called Upper Doweling because it goes up. And this is a rendering of how that could look. You may have seen this in the coordinated plan, which was released a couple months ago, and it's been in a few news articles and such. And the proposal is to have a sidewalk on the north side, and then on the south side having a shared use path. If you've cycled on Doweling or biked or walked on Doweling right now, you know that there's an in-street bicycle lane. With this proposed design, we'd be moving that south here and having a shared use path to share with cyclists and pedestrians. Definitely this is the type of treatment we typically use when we have a very constrained right-of-way. We don't want to acquire any property or eminent domain, any of the properties on this street. And so this is a treatment we use similar to what has been recommended on Johnson Street Northeast with that reconstruction, which starts in April. I'm going to move into a cross section that provides a bit more details of this treatment. So you can see the project limits are from Lindell and travel eastward into the site. You'll see we have a 6-foot boulevard or 6-foot sidewalk, a boulevard of varying width, and then on the south side, that shared use path, which is 10 feet, and also some more boulevard space. And this treatment continues east to the Doweling Bridge. Gonna just call on Ciara just to see if you want to provide any more. Ciara is one of our lead designers, is doing a lot of the technical design pieces from a multimodal standpoint. Ciara, am I missing anything or anything else you want to just bring up from a design perspective for the group?
Yeah, I think I'd add that we are able to put, curb extensions on 6th Street there, and also have a raised crossing of the shared use path across 6th Street. I wanted to mention, today the sidewalk is full of obstructions and it's on the back of curbs. So here, this will be an unobstructed shared use path with the boulevard where we can put things. As you cross over to the Doweling Bridge, that is where we will be able to separate pedestrians and bicyclists from the bridge all the way down to the site. We aren't, let's say, as constrained. Another feature to highlight here is adding that 4th leg of a crosswalk at the on and off ramps there at the Doweling Avenue Bridge. So this is just few features or pedestrian improvements to mention. We are showing the existing bus stops. Again, right now, the bus stops alight right onto the sidewalk, and here there would be a little bit more space for passengers and people waiting.
I'd just
May
like
I
to
ask a
say,
quick question?
I'd just like to say before a question, shout out PAC. We listen. We know the fourth leg on the interchanges and the ramp. So we've been working with MnDOT on there, and we do have some preliminary positive reactions to adding that fourth leg on both sides. So just want to acknowledge the work and the recommendations coming out of this committee.
Thank you on that one.
My quick question on this particular area is whether there are any safety concerns with transitioning from an off-street bikeway to an on-street bikeway at a freeway on-ramp. Are there other similar intersections that are comparable to this in the city that we have maybe a safety record for?
I can take that one. We do have a couple instances where we have treatments like this. There's one going to be built here in South Minneapolis in 2021, the Portland Ave project, for those of you familiar. I think you do bring up a good point. It's about being very intentional and detailed with that design. One thing that we didn't have quite figured out at this 10% level yet, but we are looking to see if MnDOT will allow us to carry that off-street trail right up to the bridge abutment. So we are looking to carry that off-street feature through the intersection and potentially having a raised crossing through that as well. So those are two details that we don't have ready quite yet pinned up to share with you today, but we're looking very, very closely at that, especially with the turn moves and the conflict. So it's very good attention to detail that you brought that up.
Thank you, Nathan.
Can I just request that as you give us bike lane, mixed use, and sidewalk widths, you also give us the vehicle lane widths, just so that we have the context of that as well.
Right now, we have 10-foot vehicle lanes, and I believe the shared use path is 10 feet in this section.
Yeah. When you give the vehicle width lanes, does that include reaction zones that are, or is
the through lanes are 10 feet, the turn lane is 10 feet, and we do have a 2-foot curb and gutter for conveyance of stormwater. And just knowing that this area is pretty pinched with some of the bigger buses and trucks coming through at the intersection, so we are mindful of the transit service coming through this area.
Okay, so we can add those on. Thank you.
Great questions, everyone. I'm going to keep moving this along. There's still a ton to cover, but appreciate the questions. They're all really great and are keeping us very mindful of the challenges. So if you've gone across the Doweling Bridge today, sorry about the echo. So if you've gone across the Doweling Bridge today, you know what that experience is like. It's high vehicle volume, a really constrained sidewalk space. You can see in this image here, the bicycle travel lane is still on street. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve this space. We've been working with MnDOT to understand bridge life, understand their CIP cycle. I know they use a different term than CIP, but really to understand when they would be able to cost participate on improvements for the bridge. At the very minimum, we were thinking of a treatment like this, which is similar to 26th Avenue North, which is a two-way bike trail on the northern side of the street. So 26th Avenue North is about 1.5 miles south of Doweling. And the overall treatment east and west that we're recommending on Doweling is very similar to that. So this is with bollards and just paint. A more robust example we're looking at is having a more robust separated treatment like this, with also some artistic railing treatments as well. Conversations with MnDOT are still in a very preliminary state, and we do recognize through community feedback and just through our own experiences, a strong desire to provide a more robust experience crossing the bridge. So it's still very forthcoming for that design treatment. Any questions on the bridge before we go into the Doweling-Washington intersection? Okay. So Lower Doweling today is also a very challenging intersection for those that have walked or biked or even driven. There's just a lot of challenges with intersection skews, sight lines, and then a lack of really off-street or separated bike facilities. This is our preliminary proposal for Washington. You can see that traveling here, we're restoring some of the intersection skew. We have a two-way bike facility and then a separate sidewalk for pedestrians. And so remember that east-west treatment that started on Lindell and continues across Doweling, across the bridge, will continue along here and into the site. We also are preparing some north-south connectivity on Washington as well. So we would start a two-way treatment here and are working with the county on continuing that treatment north to Weber Camden 42nd project, and then also continuing that treatment south onto 2nd Street North, and then ultimately connecting to Lowry Avenue North. CR, I'll just turn to you and see if you have any more design details that you want to just highlight to the group.
Yeah, I guess I'd just highlight that this is the intersection of two high injury streets that the city identified in the Vision Zero plan. And so we very much have our eye towards improving this intersection for pedestrians and bicyclists, and it will improve it for motorists as well. If you've been to this intersection, Doweling actually is so skewed that it has separate signals. So if you're waiting, standing there on the corner with your bike or in your car, you have to wait quite a bit of time, and some people get frustrated and do some interesting things. We are able to, again, fully separate all of the movements between pedestrians and cyclists at their intersection. So protected intersection design, for those that are familiar with those words. We are introducing a truck apron. It is the tannish area there along Washington at Doweling in an effort to slow down the trucks that are turning through the intersection. And then another thing I wanted to highlight is the sidewalk on the south side of Washington. If you can read the fine print, it does say, or it is a 6-foot sidewalk, but know that the idea is that these are redevelopment parcels. And so the pedestrian realm would ideally be a bit wider based on the building frontage and the activation at the ground level there. So although that may look a little narrow now and it kind of goes off into the grass, know that we'll, of course, work to integrate that with the redevelopment as it comes along. One more note too is that we are trying to put in that fourth leg of the on-off ramp crossing. I will say there are some real challenges with grades and getting directional ramps on that western leg, but that's something that we're working through those design details right now, having enough space for directional ramps and the APS push buttons and things of that nature.
I've got 2 questions on this. The truck apron, is that different than, can you explain what that is? I don't think I recall seeing that previously.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a picture in it here. So it would be a different colored concrete and it would be mountable. Figure if you're a pedestrian, the truncated domes would be behind the truck apron, so it wouldn't suggest that you wait out in that area. But it is an area where if there aren't trucks and if you don't have vision impairments, it does shorten the crossing a bit and then slow trucks down. But that's something when we come back in March, we could have some photographs of that if that would be helpful to understand what that treatment might look like.
So there, it is raised, unlike we've done poured concrete aprons, hoping that would slow drivers, but still work for trucks. But this is something that is raised somewhat.
Correct. So different than Washington Avenue downtown, where it's more of a flat. This would actually have some rise to it. Exactly. You're right, Julia.
Thank you. And I guess I also kind of have questions about possibly doing pork chops, even though I usually hate them, just in some of these radii that and distances that feel really scary, particularly given driver behaviors in this area. I'm curious what that might do for providing some sort of crossing refuge, especially like on Doweling, with the ramp where there's a no man's land on the east side of the north-south crossing.
You kind of hit the main point that we have been debating with and looking at TAP and what TAP says about getting rid of pork chops. And we have been spinning on this for a while. And that was one of the things that we thought would be really helpful to get some feedback on this group. We did put some of the slow turning wedge and the truck aprons as they work for. But if there is some desire from this group to see some of those pork chops reinstituted here, that's something we can definitely pursue. We were trying to remove those because we know the challenges they have, but we're definitely open. It's just very, very difficult, and we've spun many iterations here. So very open to like what people are seeing and what they might want us to take a look at.
I personally would be interested in seeing sort of the side by side of those treatments to be able to discuss them fully, given what's going on here.
Okay. Those are great comments. I'm going to keep this moving along since we're getting close to time. This is an illustrative rendering of what Lower Doweling would look like. So this is just a little bit past the intersection that we just discussed in the last image. And you can see a two-way bicycle path, separated sidewalk, some active land use. And this treatment would continue east into the site. Now I'm going to move into the Parkway. This is a pretty big image, so I apologize. It's a little hard to zoom in and see everything. But the last two images we showed were this area here along Doweling, and then that treatment with the separated two-way bike trail, and then the sidewalk would travel here, and then you'd enter into the site. So this would be the initial intersection. Doweling would at this point transition into the Parkway. We'd have a table raised crossing, and then a treatment of a two-way cycle track here on the south, traveling for the Parkway. This is the park. This would be some active land use here as well, some living facilities, the music venue here. And this is the site gateway. We understand that in an intersection like this, that we really want to provide safe crossings for cyclists and pedestrians, reduce vehicle speeds as well, so they're not, speeding through this intersection and causing any safety concerns. But at a high level, this is the Parkway. The next slide shows a more illustrative rendering. Seer, anything else you want to comment on in regards to the Parkway treatment we're currently designing?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the goal is to have, again, pedestrian and bicyclists separated throughout the site. And even though phase one of the Parkway stops with a cul-de-sac, the idea is that there would be a shared use path to connect from the park side down to 33rd. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also we'll be working through more design details for that raised intersection, making sure that it's people with vision impairments are able to navigate it, that there's enough, vertical elements. But the idea is really when you arrive at the park with the raised crossing, that a car starts to feel like a guest. And so that is the design details that we're working through.
And I'm just going to keep moving this along. Here's an illustrative rendering of what the Parkway would look like. You see the two-way roadway with the red granite chip seal, a separate two-way bike facility, and then a separate pedestrian facility. And you see the priority in terms of who has the best view, and it's the pedestrians, right up next to the river. This is actually the southern area of the site. This is where some of the light industrial uses are scoped in the coordinated plan, but you can see this treatment extending all the way north and south along the Parkway.
We don't have dimensions yet to share today, but for those interested, standard Parkway, 10-foot travel lanes, 1-foot curb and gutter, and the bikeway would be 10 to 12, and the pedestrian path would be 8 to 10.
Yep. Thank you for those
Is there
comments.
any chance that you're looking at separating the kinds of uses of bikes? I know on a lot of parkways there's kids learning, and definitely including commuters with 6-year-olds tends to be not great. Is there a way of trying to get people who are more confident bikers sharing with vehicle traffic, or vehicle traffic sort of secondary to more confident bikers?
Good question, Julia. I think right now is we wouldn't pursue on-street bike lanes. There's just too much valuable space that we'd want for green infrastructure and other pedestrian usage, such as trees and lighting, that we can bring that up with the park board to see what they would think. But right now we weren't leaning towards that just because stormwater treatment was such a high priority here because of the river location.
not in terms of separated like on-street bike facilities, but in terms of really making it clear that people can bike in the street on the Parkway.
Oh,
More confident bikers will feel comfortable taking their lane and going at whatever speed they want to go, knowing that, you know, the 6-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, the people out for a slow ride are going to be on the other path.
okay.
Moving on to 33rd Avenue. So this is the secondary access to the site. If you've been on 33rd Avenue, you've seen the roadway condition is not in the best shape. I think it's a PCI of like 25. There are no sidewalks, nor any bike facilities. So huge room for improvement. We're proposing a shared use path. You can see it here on the south side, traveling into the site. There's also 3 active rail crossings as well that are part of this design that we'll be providing ADA crossings for. And then we have a roundabout sketched in here to aid in a lot of the vehicle access to the site, especially with the southern land uses that are those light industrial uses and being able to get those large vehicles in and out safely. This is not to scale. I think this diagram is scared a few people based on the size. So please know that we're not going to design a roundabout to encourage unsafe vehicle speeds. Just wanted to bring that up. And then also just Second Street North is here. So in a previous slide, I talked about at Washington and Doweling, the treatment that we're doing on the corner there. And then we're also working to try to reconfigure Second Street North with the treatment that keeps the cyclists on the east side of the street and allows them to travel safely north-south on this segment here, and then also connect to Lowry Avenue North, which is just a few blocks south of here. Ciara or Nathan, any other design features that we want to highlight for this segment?
I was just going to mention that, yeah, the roundabout is a very early design, so know that we'll be digging into more details of where the shared use path or sidewalks cross motor vehicle pathways. And then Alexander mentioning Second Street. For those that are familiar, the sidewalk does end very near 33rd Avenue, just a little bit to the north. So, you know, exploring concepts north of Second Street, you know, isn't part of this project per se, but just know we recognize that the sidewalk does end there as well.
In previous iterations of this project, there hadn't been proposed improvements along 33rd for walking or biking. We see this as a huge equity need for the north side to have access for walking, biking to jobs, the venue, the river. So this is something that the project team did push for to get added to the project. So we are happy to share that we are adding walking, biking features at this site. It's critically important for the north side.
Appreciate that.
So we're pretty much, there's just a few slides left. This talks about railroad crossings. We briefly covered that in the last slide. But at 33rd, there's going to be 3 crossings. At Doweling, there'll be 1 crossing. So we're definitely going to be designing treatments for the safety of users and abiding by those ADA crossing standards. Engagement timeline, we're at a 10% conceptual design right now. We'll be coming back in March with a 30% design, so things are moving pretty quickly. We have an open house on Tuesday of next week from 5 to 6:30. It's going to follow a pretty typical City of Minneapolis open house via Zoom link, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end. You know, all of you are definitely welcome to attend, and I can provide those links in the chat box. And then we will be looking for council layout approval in September. August-September timeframe of this year, so it's moving along pretty quickly. And then I'm just going to open it up for questions from the audience. Let's see, Peter had his hand raised. Or is it?
Yeah, thank you. I was curious about the transit components. Are those being looked at this stage, or what's anticipated to bring people in, other than in cars?
Absolutely. We are designing to accommodate transit on Doweling and also on Lindell for existing transit lines. And we're also having conversations with Metro Transit to provide transit service on the actual UHT site. Obviously, there is no transit to the site right now, which for obvious reasons. But we are having conversations as to potential locations within the site. And that takes a lot of coordination with land use. Also, providing them the ability to turn their vehicles around, to park their vehicles for a restroom break. So yes, we are definitely having those conversations and doing a lot of preliminary design so that way when they are able to bring service here, we've already designed the parkway in a way that is compatible with their uses. And that's a very common question we've gotten from engagement is providing transit service. So it's definitely a really popular question.
Thanks.
I've got two questions. The smaller of the two is just thinking about benches along those connections from the north side, especially if people are, coming over for entertainment purposes or with kids and strollers and being able to sit down to readjust things, take a break if it's a longer walk than a person usually does. I want to make sure that kind of feature is included.
Oh, yeah.
And usable all seasons. Awesome. Knowing that's locked in would be a big relief. And then my bigger question is, we know that the ways that we've designed sidewalks in the past have not really accounted for snow and snow melt. And given that this is a really full-scale reconstruct with stormwater being integrated, and we've seen, sidewalks CPED has all the water from every building draining across sidewalks as part of their plan as a default. I'm very curious about who you're working with and what's going on to design sidewalks differently so that we don't see the same issues here that we see in the rest of the city in regards to melt, ice formation, freeze thaw, things falling off of vehicles onto them, all those other details.
Great questions. I can definitely touch on the bench piece, and then I might defer the sidewalk question to Nathan from a green infrastructure standpoint. So with benches, yes, I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but part of our public realm scope is around public art, and we're working with Juxtaposition Arts, a firm in North Minneapolis, to really think of how we make the public realm inclusive. So that way, when people are here on the site, they want to stay on the site, and to make people have that feeling they want to be comfortable. So benches, art that's inclusive and representative of the area, kind of just public gathering spaces as well. So we are definitely considering that and are working in tandem with our design team to carve out spaces in the permanent infrastructure where those benches and other things can be added.
And that'll go along Doweling to Lindell as well, so that
Yep,
people can
along Doweling and then within the Parkway as well, yes.
Awesome, thank you.
And that's kind of why we have these spaces highlighted here that are, potential opportunity areas, because we were, calling out those additional spaces, especially near the transit stops. Nathan, do you want to talk about some of the more green infrastructure sidewalk components around drainage?
Yeah, Julie, I know what you're referring to as far as like the current built environment and draining private stormwater onto public. Clearly, we have a blank slate here. It's actually one of the few places in Minneapolis where we have such a blank slate. And there's a big push to do more thoughtful stormwater, especially as it relates to drainage, and doing more of depressed swales to pick up exactly what you said on, and doing a more thoughtful approach to site-wide grading and how we can track where the water goes, not only for conveying it, but for treating it, whether it's infiltration, filtration before it goes into the river. So we are taking a very thoughtful approach on what that means for not only normal year stormwater, but also winter operations. So we have a new green infrastructure coordinator who will be helping track that item with us. So
who is that individual?
Allison Bell is new to the city, probably about two-ish months in, I think. But yeah, she's been working on a lot of the green infrastructure that you may be seeing pop up around the city where we're doing larger scale reconstructions.
And she's different than the person who was working on the school up in Northeast with some green infrastructure about a year and a half ago.
Katie Kowalczyk was the previous green infrastructure coordinator. She was promoted to a new position, and Allison is the new green infrastructure coordinator. Circle of life.
Thank you.
We're
And
starting.
I did have one follow-up from last meeting. You did ask about public restrooms. I did confirm with Park Board that at a minimum, they will have temporary biffies on the site, but their goal would be to have permanent restrooms there. So that's one other thing.
To integrate in CPED's pitches for developers. I've noticed like drinking fountains that are and benches that are being integrated into buildings over along the U of M Transitway, and it seems like sort of a quasi-public restroom might be another ask that could be made in such, and you know, depending on what the city requires of developers.
That's something we can bring back to the team, yes. But there's also another forum that this group, if they want to comment on the coordinated plan for CPED that's going for public comment next month, as well as the AER, and we can provide those resources if you're interested in learning ways to comment on more of the development.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Nathan and Alexander and Sierra. We appreciate all you presented. We look forward to having you back.
Absolutely. I'm just going to put a link in the bottom here with the public rail infrastructure link to the Upper Harbor Terminal site. And thank you for having us, and thank you so much for the great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. And now we go to the Lindell Avenue North with Chris Kartheiser and Nathan Kramer.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. So I know we're at 6 o'clock, so I'll try and move through this quick, and then we can answer any questions. Chris Kartheiser, I know most of you because I helped staff this committee. And then Nathan, if you're still on, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Nathan Kemmer, work in the Transportation Engineering and Design Division of Public Works. I'm working with Chris on this project, and thanks for having me.
Sure.
And I'm just going to start to share my screen here. 1 second while I get it all set up. All right, so we are here for 0% to talk about the Lindell Avenue North pedestrian safety improvements. And this is we were awarded regional solicitation funding, so federal funding for this. We applied back in 2018, and this will be 2022 construction. And it is a spot treatment. So we have 7 different intersections. So this is a retrofit. It's not a reconstruction. And we're pretty tied to the intersections that we put into this application. So we don't foresee these changing at this point, unless some kind of big issue arises, in which case we would handle that if it came. But so there's 7 intersections between 22nd and 40th in North Minneapolis on Lindell Avenue North. And there's a few reasons that we chose this corridor. There have been a lot of pedestrian vehicle crashes here leading up to this. Just scroll over. Between 2011 and 2015, there were 16 pedestrian vehicle crashes. That is quite a few. And there were 4 fatalities, which is, as you know, no fatalities are, we're not willing to put up with any fatalities on our roadways, but 4 is a lot. I've been out on this roadway a few times since I started working on this project, and it is immediately noticeable every single time I'm out there that people are going very fast. Speeds are very high. This is the roadway is one lane in each direction, and then the southbound has a parking lane. So on the northbound side, so the eastern side of this roadway, if you're walking, there are a lot of parts where there's either a kind of a small buffer or not much of a buffer, and it just you can feel the vehicles driving fast. We did a speed study as well, and we did it at a few different places, but generally what came back was that something we look at for is called the 85th percentile, was about 38 miles an hour. So that means that 15% of people are going faster than that. And almost everyone is speeding on this corridor. This roadway is designated to go down to 25 miles an hour per the new speed limit guidance. And so we need a major speed reduction on this corridor. So that's one of the main things that we're looking to do with this project in order to increase pedestrian safety.
I have a
And some of the,
question about speed.
oh, okay. Sure. I mean, sure. Go for it.
So are the speeds, is that 38 miles per hour? Is that essentially the design speed of the road, or are people exceeding the speed that the road is designed for?
I mean, I would argue that if that's the speed people are going out there, then that's kind of the current design speed. I think in my experience, people drive based on what the roadway looks and feels like, and so the fact that people are driving 38 miles an hour or faster out there means that right now that's kind of what the roadway feels like it should be. And it's not a so yeah, I didn't go into the ADT. So 8,000 to 11,000 motor vehicles along the corridor. There are some transit routes. It's not particularly transit heavy, but transit does run on here. And then we've got 480 pedestrian count and 30 bicyclist count. And I'm not sure exactly what part of the corridor those were taken at, but it varies throughout this corridor. So what we put again in the application here, some of our, I guess, standard treatments that we consider for these projects would be curb extensions, pedestrian medians, or pedestrian refuge islands, they're often called. There's currently one traffic control device out there at Lindell Avenue North and 27th, which is the right in the middle of Farview Park, not Fairview, but Farview, which is a little weird for the Twin Cities. It always screws me up. And so we'll be looking likely to upgrade the traffic control device that's out there to an RRFB, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. And we'll figure out. Right now, it's one of those intersections that only the north side connection is there with curb cuts for pedestrians. So it's a T intersection, and the south side does not have curb ramps to cross Lindell. We're looking into adding that on the south side, and whether or not we should be adding extending that traffic control device or not. But that's likely the only place that we would put a traffic control device on this corridor. It's not off the table anywhere else, but that's kind of the main location that has a large destination, that being the park, out of the ones that we've chosen here. And then I can't remember if I already said we'll be doing ADA, making all the curb ramps ADA compliant, which they are not currently for the length of the corridor. So here's another kind of closer look at the corridor. As I said, northbound and southbound travel lane, and then parking on one side. And this is just sort of another option. I'm not presenting any designs today. We have started to tool around with some different options at these, and some of the unique designs, I think, for a retrofit especially. I think you saw some of the chicane designs on Bryant today. We're looking into those. I think in a perfect world, those would be really nice for speed mitigation. And when you make a automobile driver move over, like instead of just going straight, it kind of inherently tends to slow them down, especially if you're doing that with a curb as opposed to paint. It's really going to come down to cost and budget. We do have 7 intersections for this whole thing, and so we're looking at how to maximize the most for all these 7 intersections. A couple of these at the north end between 40th and 39th. Those intersections are back to back, as well as this is 22nd and 23rd here. So we definitely won't be doing any mid-block crossings, but by doing sort of a chicane design or something like that, you have the potential to maybe switch parking on these blocks, so to help kind of facilitate that chicane movement. So those are just things that we're considering with this. We definitely have not settled on that, and again, cost is going to be something to consider with do here. We're also working with Allison, who was just mentioned, the green infrastructure coordinator, for potential green infrastructure, stormwater related infrastructure throughout the corridor. And that'll be my first time working with her and trying to implement some of that into a project. So we're at the very early stages of that as well, but we'll try to maximize that. Nathan, if you want to add anything, feel free. That's all I've got.
Nope, nothing to add.
Great. Then if anyone has questions, happy to take them. Peter?
Yeah, thanks. On the long, I didn't catch how many traffic lights, signal lights are along the stretch, but on a long stretch like that, it becomes just the drivers. When I speak of drivers, talking about myself, you just kind of look like, oh, I got to make the next light, make the next light, make the next light. Is signal timing a strategy that would be effective here?
That's a good question. So something that I didn't mention. So thanks for bringing this up. These are all non-signalized intersections, aside from the one traffic control device.
Oh, okay.
And that's just that was intentional in how we did this. It happens to align with something we're applying for HSIP funds, highway safety improvement funds for the signalized intersections. I don't believe that we've heard back on that application, but that would be potentially doing similar types of improvements at the signalized intersections along this corridor, which I haven't looked into how new those signals are, what the signal timing is, any of that. I will definitely bring that back to see if that's something that makes sense either for this project as we're just addressing this huge corridor, even though we're not hitting those lights. Is there something we can do to adjust the timing? Or if maybe that's something we just kind of tee up for the HSIP project, which would be a little bit further down the line. That's not until 2025 or something like that if we get those funds that we applied for. But that's a good question, so thank you.
All right, thank you.
To what extent are the changes in this project tied in with the changes in the Lindell segment that ends at Broadway, the pedestrian improvements that are happening there, so that you have a coherent feel to the street as you travel along the corridor?
Yeah, so they are separate projects. The project that you're referring to is a 4 to 3 lane conversion. I believe with some bikeway elements as well, and that is all. Matthew, feel free to correct me, but I believe striping and paint, or yeah, so striping and potentially bollards is the limits of that. So it's a pretty different feel, in my opinion, south of Broadway compared to north of Broadway, and that's not to say we shouldn't be considering how to manage speeds and safety throughout the whole corridor. But because of the right of way and the roadway width changes, it is a pretty different feel. I also want to say that the ADTs, the vehicle traffic south of Broadway is quite a bit lower. I'm kind of pulling this out of a hat, but I want to say it's more to the tune of a few thousand as opposed to like 8 to 10,000. But that is something that we're aware of, and I do think that anything that we do at the intersection of 22nd and 23rd is going to help kind of be sort of a gateway, ideally sort of a gateway treatment that's like adjusts drivers' behavior with speed. Since we have those 2 blocks there, I think that in an ideal world, by the time they hit 22nd and 23rd, we're hoping to really slow the speeds for northbound travelers.
I wanted to go into, oh, go ahead. I wanted to go into the design speed. Just kind of curious if this is an area where people are purposefully speeding, or if more placemaking, more, I don't know. I appreciate the chicanes, but it seems it seems like the speeds are higher than I would expect the design speeds to be, which I'm curious if that happens and if that's happening here. Like if you just looked at it from the way that the road was initially engineered, are these the speeds that you would expect to see, or is there something additional going on?
So one thing I just want to note, like it's not definite that there will be the chicanes. We're looking into that.
Sounds cool. Sounds great.
But just want to make sure of that. There's not a lot of like ped or bike activated space along here, or like people activated space along this. You've got the park for the most part. It's single family almost through the entirety, with a few institutional, like there's some religious institutions, at least one, maybe a couple. Like the bus ridership's not that high. My guess is that even the pedestrian count of 480, close to 500, is probably closer to one of the busier intersections here. And there's not that many people moving along the length of this corridor, or even like 4 or 5 blocks at a time. And not to say that there shouldn't be, or people don't want to be, just because of how it feels right now. But so I don't know. I think all of those things probably play into the speed of how people are traveling out there. I don't know that we have a way of saying, are people intentionally speeding compared to anywhere else, or even how to necessarily distinguish that based on a segment in the city.
It's still currently posted at 30 miles an hour, right?
By now it should have changed.
Has it dropped?
I believe we've signed all the new speed limits.
Yes.
Matthew?
Yep. I
Yeah.
believe so.
So it should be signed as 25. And the speed study was done, I believe, before, probably right around when we were making the changes. But I mean, if there's one thing we do know, the simple fact of changing a speed limit is not going to change the speed on a roadway 9.9 times out of 10.
Do you have any anecdotal information about the kinds of speeding that people are seeing?
My anecdotal information is that I mean, people are just going fast. I don't know if it's if they're I'm not sure exactly where they're connecting to. It's it's wide, it's fast, it's personal vehicles mostly. I was out there. I was out there. I will say this. So I did a few quick build projects. Actually, each of these intersections this past year that were implemented, just like some basic bump outs and medians, and went out there and tested them. And beforehand, I don't think anyone would have ever stopped for me when trying to cross the street. And I did try to cross at one of the medians, and 2 cars went past, and then the third stopped, which I still found to be like somewhat of a success. So I do think it's like the design of the roadway is like it does not say people use this outside of cars. And so the hope is that with this we can kind of flag that for drivers and slow people down. I don't need anything today, and I will be back for a 30% for sure. We're probably in the next like couple months, like maybe March or April or something like that, and that'd probably most likely be the last time I'd be here, depending on kind of the design process. But we'll have some designs and layouts to show you at that point.
Okay. Any other questions, or are we ready to sign off with Chris? That's it? Okay. Thank you, Chris. And any other announcements or anything, or are we ready to go?
I see a Chris Ross online. Is Chris Ross a PAC member? Are we welcoming Chris Ross? Is that or is Chris in some other role?
Oh, I didn't see it. Good job, Peter.
I think he may be off now. I'm looking at the attendees list. I didn't
right,
see
yeah,
that name
okay.
earlier, but
Is he a new member, Matthew?
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
I was trying to look to see. Yeah, that's interesting. Our full committee got interrupted, obviously, by the events at the Capitol. So yeah, Christopher Ross, and then Sarah Goodell and Matt Steinruck are the 3 new members, and dang, hopefully they will attend the the PMP coming up, and we can take some time at the beginning to say hi. And
Were they all here?
I don't believe so. I think just Chris.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.